the point of these sort of coffee chats really is to talk about topics as women that are really important to us, particularly as we move through menopause. But it's not just about menopause. We know that that's a hormonal time of our lives, but then isn't every part of our lives hormonal? And we're going through changes all the time. And before we came on camera, I was saying to you, Kathryn, that I feel differently at 57 than I did at 55, when in fact than I did at 56. And with each year that we age, we feel differently about different topics, and life kind of changes for us and around us. So what I wanted to do is just take this opportunity to have a chat about the things that are really important to our age group, our demographic, but actually really important to women in such a changing world that we find ourselves in, and talk about topics like aging and relationships and work and hormones and menopause and you name it. We did say we would have a very, very long list, and we haven't got that long. But at the moment, you're a captive audience because you've actually fallen over again, haven't you?
Yes, we seem to have a reoccurring theme in 2026. This is my second fall in 5 months. And I mean
It's
minor stumbles, not dramatic falls, literally minor stumbles that result in injuries that appear to last longer than you would anticipate.
Yes, I mean, it's a really serious topic, isn't it? And I said you're the third person that I've spoken to, third woman I've spoken to in a week that has actually fallen over. Often it just batters and bruises our pride. But, you know, I remember somebody telling me many years ago, before we launched Menopause Experts Group, somebody was recounting a story about making a bed. That was all she was doing, was making a bed, and she broke her leg. She wasn't doing anything particularly much, just making a bed. And then another story, you know, as you're hearing about this, and someone else will, you know, put their hand up and say, "Oh, yeah, I broke my leg just tripping over in the garden." And as the years have gone on, I've heard more and more about women falling. And of course, we talk about osteopenia and osteoporosis and all the things that, all the great things that we might have to
Yep.
look forward to as we age. And so fall prevention, we never thought in our 50s we'd be talking about fall prevention. But actually, it's really important, isn't it? So just talk to me about what's just happened to you.
I think that my most recent fall was a couple of weeks ago. I was at the British Grand Prix, Formula One at Silverstone. So the brain is still trying to do all of the busy, active, exciting things that you look forward to. But you know, those golden moments that you want to tick, done that, that's a bucket list check. Was just literally walking, had on flat, chunky shoes that I probably wouldn't normally wear, tripped over my own toe and went down on one knee. And there was no stairs, there was no trip, there was no dramatic fall. But you know, I did significant damage to one knee that we're kind of 2.5 weeks on and still dealing with the bruising and the consequences of that. But and the previous fall in February, exactly the same. Coming out of the dentist, was coming down some stairs, didn't quite know what happened, lost my footing, and then tore rotator cuff in my right shoulder, which then has gone on to typical menopause symptom of frozen shoulder. So yeah, it's
So let's just go back to the knee then, because this is a new knee of yours, right? So this
it,
is this is this
this is
is almost your bionic knee.
this is the knee replacement that I had in 2021. Yep, I burst the meniscus behind my kneecap 2021 mid self build, and had emergency surgery to replace the knee.
Just
And
incredible.
DEXA scan definitely showed there was osteopenia in several areas within the joints within my body. So
I would,
curiosity sent me for a DEXA scan. The hospital didn't do that. I paid for that privately because I wanted to understand why something so minor had created such a significant impact. And it showed a significant variation of wear across multiple joints.
It's really important, isn't it? We talk about joints a lot, particularly as we move through menopause, but actually we know that these things start, way before menopause, and we can start seeing joint pain and feeling joint pain in our 20s and 30s as warning signs, really. But we don't even talk about that until we're much older, and the symptoms are much worse. It's a thing that we have to navigate as women, I think, because joint pain during menopause, as we know, is really prevalent. There are so many women that experience joint pain, and they don't realise that it's hormone related. Of course, we know that estrogen plays a huge part in the moisture and lubrication around the joints, which then causes us problems. But falling over, it can really impact and change the course of our lives in an instance.
It's something that you don't consider, something you don't really think is relevant to our age group, and something you attribute to what I would call aging relatives in their 70s and 80s. It's not something that you contemplate being linked to being in your 50s. But having had 2 in 5 months, it's very obvious that it's definitely a risk that needs more attention, and a risk that needs more discussion during menopause sessions.
And is there anything that you think that, when you look back at falling over? I mean, I took a little stumble at the bottom of the stairs the other day, and I sort of thought, why did I do that? Normally I wouldn't. Why did I do that? And I'm ultra conscious of the stairs now as well. But I had flip-flops on. It's the middle of the summer. Our mothers would have told us not to wear flip-flops on the stairs when we were children. And so I kind of know that the flip-flops would have been the enemy. But other than that, I don't really know, is it a lapse in concentration? Is it, what is it that actually causes us to fall when we've never done it before?
I think for many people it's quite a different answer. In my instance, different footwear, I think, was the issue when I stumbled and fell on the knee. I was at an event. I was conscious I was going to have painful feet because we were doing 30 to 40,000 steps a day. So I had deliberately bought chunky padded soled shoes to give me some level of comfort for the pain that I get from the soles of my feet. And I think just having wider shoes just made me clumsy. I literally stumbled on my own toes. And I think that change of shoes, as simple as it sounds, was the cause of that particular stumble and fall. But the level of injury is just ridiculous. To suddenly have the depth of bruising and the ongoing significant impact of that is just, it makes absolutely no sense to medics. Or, I was with my husband when it happened, and he stood bewildered looking at me, and it was bruising almost immediately. I was taking cocodamol almost immediately. I had it raised and iced, and he said to me within 5 minutes, "Your knee is turning black. How can you have that amount of bruising in such a tiny amount of time?" So yeah, there are definitive changes within our bodies that you don't sign up to, you're not aware of, and you just don't anticipate.
Yeah, I think,
Even as a qualified, accredited, licensed menopause coach.
yeah. Yeah, I think footwear though is a good thing. When we're in our 20s or even in our teens, and we're being told we should be wearing sensible shoes. I mean, it's a
I
conversation that
spent a lifetime, in
you'd
killer
have.
heels. And I
Yeah, yeah.
laughed when this happened. I said, I'm safer in heels than I bloody am in flats.
Yeah, it's quite incredible, isn't it? A couple of things we were told, wear big pants and flat shoes. It comes to us all. It comes to us all. I was saying your knickers get bigger every decade. That's
What's funny now is that big knickers are in.
yeah, big knickers are in. Well, I think comfort is in. I think women are learning actually that we don't have to we don't have to look sexy all the time. We don't, it's better for us to feel comfort and please ourselves rather than trying to please everyone around us. It kind of brings me on to the conversation about aging, because I have various thoughts on aging. When I was young, when I was a child, I always wanted to be older. I suppose because being a child wasn't comfortable for me. I felt like I was trapped in an adult's body anyway. But being a child wasn't playful and fun. I don't remember. I only have snippets of that, and I think a lot of people can relate to that. So I always wanted to sort of grow up, and so I was always around people that were older than me. Of course, now at 57, I'm trying to find people that are younger than me. That comes to us all. But I do remember wanting to feel and be older. Now, that would have been for psychological reasons, I'm sure. But as you get older, I remember my mother saying, even when she was 90, that she felt like she was 40. And it's catching up with us now, isn't it? It's really strange because I catch myself feeling very young in my brain, and then you kind of look in the mirror and you realize you're not that young anymore.
Yeah, I sign myself up to things that it's probably parts of capturing the bits of your young adulthood that you really enjoyed. So, for example, I was at David Guetta concert recently. So you find yourself committing to things, and then when you get to these things, you think, oh gosh, I'm going to have to do all these stairs. Oh gosh, I'm going to have to be swamped by lots of people. Oh God. And the reality of your perception of what that event was, I don't quite measure up. The event was awesome, and I'm delighted that I've gone. It was another bucket list tick. But you do think, do I actually appreciate, what limitations I have in life, or I actually think I've decided I'm invincible? And it's only when reality dawns or there's an incident that I think, yeah, well, probably you shouldn't have been doing that anyway, Kathryn.
Well, there are things that irritate us, right? The mesophobia, that's become quite a thing in my life, which for anybody who doesn't know, it's really not wanting to watch or listen to people eating. I think it started when I was nursing mum. So the older she got, and she was always, her manners were always impeccable. But of course, when Alzheimer's crept in, all of that sort of goes out the window. As you know, that it changes and they regress into almost small children. And so eating with her, I'm just being honest in saying it was difficult to sit and enjoy a meal with her at that stage in her very, very late years. But there are lots of things that irritate us. I mean, years ago there was a program, wasn't there? Grumpy Old Women or Grumpy Old Men. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do.
And I'm beginning to understand. I was quite young. We were young when that was on the TV, youngish anyway, adults. But I'm beginning to understand now why these things, that sort of grumpy element, the intolerances that we build up as we get older, things that we just don't want to put up with any longer. If I'd been at the David Guetta concert, I probably would have been saying, oh, it's too loud.
Oh, I was bouncing on my toes and, jumping around and singing and dancing. My husband was looking at me like, who is this person? But it's that capability to tolerate things that irritate is definitely something that you lose or you choose not to facilitate any longer. So I refer to it as losing your filter. You some things you just think, I don't have to do this anymore. I'm not putting up with that. Just stop. Other times it's you're observing other people and thinking, oh, they said that out loud.
Yeah, the filter
had just gone.
The filter I think, is a really valid point because, I was saying to you when I was having technical problems before we set this call up, and there were a few F-bombs whilst I was trying to plug everything in and then unplug it. And then, we can come on to technology, can't we? But yes, I swear, and quite a lot now, and I didn't. until I was 50. Because I was bringing up children, and I would never swear around the children, and so swearing just wasn't in my vocabulary at all. I would perhaps have to go into another room and scream mildly, but I would have to find another way of venting. So of course I would have been masking a lot of my frustration inwardly, and I used to sort of frown upon potty-mouthed women. Now I am one. It's.
I remember in one of my first senior roles, there was an older lady who was beyond retirement age at that point and had a bit of a reputation as a tyrant, but she was the most phenomenal mentor and very gracious and very kind and generous towards me as I was learning. But I remember her having this terribly posh upper class capability to swear and it not sound offensive. She would drop an F-bomb mid-sentence and carry on chatting. And I can remember being utterly hysterical because being posh, upper class, and an F-bomb in the middle just was so contradictory. She had no one left to impress and no cares to give about it, just mid-sentence and carried on. Such a contradiction to the person that your perception of who she was as an individual.
Oh, so funny. The kids used to tease me and say, what are the worst swear words that you know, Mummy? And I'd say, bollock nibble willy. Now they know not to ask.
No, yeah, it's like, don't go there. It's not right. Do you know, it's not even the swearing, it's the filter for, and I'm going to give you an example. So my mother-in-law's in hospital currently, having had a fall. More of a blackout that caused the fall, to be completely fair. But she twice this week in hospital has said things that have actually made me bristle and cringe. Do none of these doctors English speaking anymore? And I'm like thinking, and take a breath, shh, keep your voice down. Or there's lots of the staff in here are black. Yes, that black girl over there. And you're going, shh.
It's an unfortunate generational, isn't it? Which thankfully is changing. But I think
rapidly changing. But,
yes,
if you're in your mid to late 80s, that's not your norm. It's not your lived experience. So I absolutely get that not having a filter piece. It is, you're trying to get her to lower her voice so that they don't actually hear. She doesn't think she's doing or saying anything wrong. She's being quite genuine and having that conversation, but it's just her lived experience is very different to ours.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And our lived experience is going to be so different to our kids when they get to our age. And there is this generational shift. I think we've absolutely got to maintain a sense of humour, especially when you're going through menopause. I think you need it. If you don't have a sense of humour and you can't laugh at yourself, it's going to make it all the more miserable. But let me ask you about aging and because I suppose when you get to our age, we recognise death, okay, because we would have lost people, loved ones, parents. And even friends, and that becomes poignant, doesn't it? When you start losing friends in your 50s, then that becomes very poignant, and it sits with you. And I think that you suddenly have a mental change up because you become much more aware of your own mortality, and I think that's quite right for us to do. I mean, we really need to age well. And you and I would have absolutely seen, our mother's generation, very stoic, but there's a difference between being poor and rich or being poor and wealthy, because the aging process is different for those that are in, have very poor economics, and for those that have access to good healthcare. So they tend to age better. But our aging process, suddenly we become acutely aware of it, particularly when you start falling over. Okay. So that's something that makes us think about aging and what happens in another 10 years, in another 20 years. How are we going to age well? And so that longevity becomes really, really important. I've always said, people who want to live for a very long time are the happy ones. Miserable people just don't care about what happens next because they're miserable. But for those of us who are happier in our lives, not everything is perfect, but I think if you've got a positive attitude anyway, then you can always turn things around. Then we're always going to be looking forward and thinking, right, how do we do this well? What can we do for ourselves that will actually help us enjoy our older years rather than dread them?
I would agree wholeheartedly. I had a conversation recently with someone about their own mother, and someone who historically, over a period of life, has been someone who's been much more likely to talk about or rely upon the negatives in life versus, I'm quite a passionate, enthusiastic, positive person. And she is really frustrated that, her mother is dwelling on the negatives in life. And it took a real conversation for me to say, I think your mother's always done that. That's not new. But it's more exaggerated and more obvious to you because she's now in ill health and because you are clearly worried and concerned about, her capabilities and the quality of life that she has. But I think that negative versus positive has a massive impact on your outlook on life, therefore your imagination of what you think you're capable of doing. If you're always negative, your brain will believe what you tell it. So, if you're consistently negative about what you're capable of doing, you will self-limit what enjoyment and pleasure you can have from life.
Yeah, I agree. I'm always talking about negative negative affirmations that we give ourselves. You've got to be so careful because the brain will act out whatever you're telling it.
Absolutely.
Whatever you're telling it, it will start to manifest and act out. Okay, let's just switch up then from aging and talk about relationships. So I'm not just talking about intimate relationships, although they do change. I know plenty of friends and champions in our network who have gone through either bereavement, where they've lost their partner, divorce, which is very prevalent. Goodness me, I think if I polled people in our network, that divorce rate would be exceptionally high, with some women on their second, sometimes third marriage. So we know that relationships are changing, and as we become more liberated, I mean, that sounds almost like an very old-fashioned word now, but we're still trying to liberate ourselves, ironically. But I suppose the more liberated we feel, the more financially stable we feel as women, the less reliant we then feel on men in our lives. And I'm not going to talk massively about patriarchy because, of course, it's talked about enough, but it does have a bearing on how we feel as women. And I think it becomes much more prevalent actually as we age, particularly if you've gone through divorce. You might be a woman on your own. I mean, I know you've got a partner and I've got a partner, so we're not on our own. But I've been there and been on my own, as I'm sure that you have. And so those relationships, just talking about heterosexual relationships at the moment, because that's what I know about, they change, don't they?
Yeah, and I think there's no secret the data tells its own story. The highest divorce rate, from an age is women 45 plus. So it's not coincidence that falls into the menopause years, I don't believe. The data doesn't lie. So I think that's very common. And I think there's that, we talked earlier about that tolerance and that capability to put up with things that maybe you would have done previously. I think that changes. There's that shift in mindset and that change in what you're prepared to tolerate. And it's talked about, many of the menopause sessions, whether they're work or whether they're private groups. It comes up as a very frequent topic with groups of women, the divorce piece. And I think the financial piece is really interesting. I did some data work for someone just a few weeks ago, and I've not actually shared it yet, which you prompted me to do. I will put it on a LinkedIn post, but they were discussing the gender pay gap, which, if you look at the different age brackets, sort of, the younger age brackets, it's only when you get to what I'm going to call childbearing years, typically, where you start to see a shift in that gender pay gap. So we've solved it at the point of starting work. We've solved it up to the age of 21. And as soon as women start to childbear, that gap in employment, or that gap in promotion, or that gap in climbing a career ladder begins to have that impact. And then, of course, many women go on to have multiple children, so that there's almost a stop in that increase in income. Men keep that going consistently and steadily. And you can see by 35 plus, the gap starts to increase. But the biggest jump in gap, again, was when we got to women, menopausal years, pulling back, stepping back, not putting themselves forward for roles, promotions, projects, or in my case, stepping out of full-time employment completely, because I didn't feel valued, didn't have any support to navigate those first few years of perimenopause symptoms, and the significant impact that has on pensions is mind-blowing, utterly mind-blowing. So significant that I actually went away and redid all of the information and pulled and thought, even I, working within this environment and working with women on a daily basis, could not believe the pensions gap between male and female.
It's pretty
devastating.
It is pretty shocking, and of course that makes us think about aging as well. I mean, I watched my mother die with nothing. She had nothing. She had a very, very difficult life. She had no, she died without owning a home. I was financially responsible for her really from about the age of 65. So it was many decades, propping up her finances. And that's why I'm still working and still looking to maintain some financial independence as I age, because it is so impactful. But the other thing that concerns me, of course, in this is women staying in very unhappy marriages, because it at least provides them with some financial security, even though they are perhaps suffering from emotional insecurity, which in my book, I'd rather be poor and happy than have some wealth and miserable.
I think, again, it goes back to the confidence piece, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Well, our confidence it takes a battering, and if you're not a particularly confident person anyway, then it's ultimately going to bring you down a bit, and you're really not going to want to make those life-changing decisions without knowing that or feeling like you can survive them.
I would. I think it's to watch someone in that situation and be unhappy, and them not to either appreciate that there's a choice and an alternative, because again, the generation beyond us, it wasn't the done thing to leave a relationship or to leave a marriage. And again, that mindset and that education, we've come a long way, but we still have the generation ahead of us who just would see the shame attached to that, versus you and I seeing the positive and the complete liberation of having that choice and freedom and happiness. It is a lot of, we carry a lot of historic beliefs with us throughout life.
Yes, I think there's definitely a message to put out there, that if you are in an unhappy relationship, just get out. You know, whatever way or however you can, just get out. Don't, you know, have some courage, because it will be really difficult. There's no way of sugarcoating it. It's going to be really, really difficult.
I agree. I think the downside to being in an unhappy relationship generally means that, yeah.
But then the upside is, I mean, I'm 6 years into mine. The upside is that once you've regained that confidence, then perhaps you can actually go out there and get what it is that you're looking for, rather than feeling as if you've got to settle. And that, I think, is the difference, is having relationships on your terms, rather than having to concede and having to filter and having to change and, you know, just settle for a life that you're unhappy with. Most of us, I suppose, when you get to your 50s in particular, you will have spent an awful lot of your life looking after everybody else, because we're naturally nurturers as women anyway. But those things are always put in our way, in our line, aren't they, that to look after. And often, even in big families, you know, if you're the natural carer, nurturer, those responsibilities, those duties tend to always fall upon you, which means that your needs and your wants then really, they're non-existent until you get to a point where you think, I've got to think about me now.
I think by default, we put everyone else first. We've always done that, as you know, as mothers, as you know, daughters or daughters-in-law. We've always put everyone else's needs first, and somewhere further down the line in the pecking order, we pick up where we can and where we have the time and the energy left. We pick up our own needs, and I think that is just a default setting. It's an inherent behaviour.
Yeah, I don't think it's something that we do begrudgingly. I mean, I don't look back on my life of, you know, rearing children and looking after mum and all of that. I don't look back on it with any form of regret, and I would do it all again, of course, because they're people that I love. But I am at a time in my life where I'm now starting to think about what I want, because you do get to a point where you think, if I don't do it now, I'm never going to be able to experience life fully on my terms and enjoying, you know, the life that I've got. So I've taught people how to be more selfish for decades, and it's not a bad thing. And I think you're much more able to look after other people actually when you have put yourself first. For a little while, because then you're much more stable, you're happier, you're more confident, and you're more grounded and solid. So when bad things happen, you're much more able to get back up again and keep going, rather than having that fragility.
Absolutely, and I think if you're the person that always steps forward first to take on the responsibility or the burden of work, other people then just expect you to. So the more you do, the more often you become the person that's expected to. And it's sometimes just being organized enough or brave enough in some cases to say to other people, you need to pick up some of this workload, or you need to pick up some of this responsibility. You know, and it doesn't matter whether that's your immediate family or whether that's, you know, the family that you've married into. It's important that people aren't just allowed to sit back and expect others to pick up that workload. And that's something you learn, I think, as you suddenly are overwhelmed by the amount you're expected to do. Sometimes you have to then speak up and say, look, the burden of workload here isn't acceptable. You need to be stepping forward, and you need to be picking up some of this work to allow everyone to still have their own work or their own life or their own responsibilities to do. But the more you do, the more you'll be left to do. I agree.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in families as well, especially if there's a little dysfunction there, which, let's face it, is every family. And those who say they're not dysfunctional, they're lying. I think that there's a fear of perhaps falling out with siblings, falling out with members of the family, by saying, look, I can't do this on my own. I need you now to help. I need you to do this, or I need you to do this. And I think it just takes a bit of confidence, doesn't it, to be vocal. But I think it's critical, because otherwise it will take you to breaking point, and then you're no good to anybody.
Well, you look at, in any emergency situation, you put yourself back on an airline and on a flight and on the drill for safety. The first thing they tell you is to put on your own mask before you help others. You don't have the capability to give if you've not looked after yourself first. But it does feel quite counterintuitive to look after you before you look after others.
Yes, because we've
got a life of caring. Yeah.
And we've been taught not to be selfish. We mustn't be selfish. We mustn't think of ourselves. But sometimes it's imperative.
I mean, I'm terribly fortunate. I've got a husband who, is really supportive of everything I do. Will always push me to do more than I'm capable of. Or if I've got that little idea buzzing around in my head, he's always the one to say, just do it. Just do it. Stop talking about it. Just do it. And I think it's easy to forget that not everyone has someone in their corner doing that.
Yes. In fact, more often than not, they won't have. And so we kind of owe it to ourselves to spend time around those people who do lift us up rather than put us down. And I know that will resonate. Okay, so let's talk about our 60s then, Kathryn.
Ooh.
Because they're only around the corner. I know age is but a number. She says, talking to somebody who's been to a David Guetta concert recently, but who has also fallen over. There's both...
I'm a bit of a life of contrast to me.
Yes, contrast. Yeah, absolutely. A contradiction. But it does make me think about my 60s. And also, what we have to compare it to. So when we remember our mothers in their 60s, those of us who have mothers in their 60s, I mean, obviously some people don't, have never seen their mothers grow into old age, which is very sad. But, what's it going to be like for us? I think I'm inspired by the changes in technology in terms of healthcare. So at times I don't fear getting older, so long as healthcare can keep up with me and my needs. But, I'm acutely aware of health and wellness and well-being, because it's what we do, eat, sleep, breathe it every day. But there is this thought that if you get sick in your 60s, or if you take poor health into your 60s, particularly in my case with in my mother living until she was 93. So in other words, I could potentially live another 30 odd years, 60 odd years if I can have my way, but another 30 odd years. That 30 years, which is sometimes a lifetime for some people, making sure that we are able to still enjoy it, and that we're not just sat in care homes, being fed and changed and all that sort of thing. It's really important, isn't it, that we don't go into our 60s blindsided by the reality that I firmly believe that we do a huge amount of aging in our 50s, right? But particularly as women, because we know that smack bang, that decade of change, naturally our hormones shifting, our estrogen lowering, and all of those things. So a lot of aging happens in our 50s. And I'm encouraged and buzzed by a lot of women I know that are in their 60s, and even some that are in their 70s, that are having the time of their lives. So for those that are going through menopause at the moment, we know that actually menopause is not a phase and we've got it for life, right? We know that that we're menopausal for life, but it doesn't mean that just because our 50s have been very difficult and painful, joint pain and hot flushes and everything else that we experience, it doesn't mean that our 60s are going to automatically be worse, because I can see that there are some huge benefits actually of entering your 60s. So talk to me about 60s.
Yeah, so for me, I look at, I've got a couple of friends who are in their 60s who have phenomenally active social lives, who have lots of fun, who do lots of lifetime trips and numbers of destinations in a year that they've never been to that they're excited to visit. And I look at them almost as the inspiration of, they've got to that point in life where they're financially stable. They incidentally all still work in whatever capacity. Some are self-employed, some just work part-time, but they have that freedom to be able to, without caring responsibilities for most of them, be able to just pick and choose what they do, to forward plan exciting, positive things to do. They're surrounded by a group of people who are of that same ilk. So that whole gather positive people in a tribe around you that support. And they get up to all sorts of mischief, which is always, their Facebook posts are always highly entertaining and engaging. And I look at that as something really positive to look forward to. And I think your hormones have stabilized. Menopause has done whatever it's done, but they're in a better place to have managed those changes and to move on beyond them. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. They're probably in a position where they think carefully about diet, they think carefully about what they eat, when they eat. They'll still drink alcohol and they'll still, go out and eat socially, but they're much more conscious of what they do around to maximize what they can have out of life, and to be preventative, if you like, about some of the further life limiting or damaging illnesses that you can come across in later life. But yeah, they have phenomenal fun. I'm signing up to that, absolutely.
Yeah, I don't fear going into my 60s at all. I find it very inspiring. And I think that if you give yourself a deadline as well, I mean, you and I have only got a couple of years left, but if you have a deadline to take good health into that decade, and I think that's the message, isn't it? Is don't wait until you're in your 60s. Spend your 50s preparing for your 60s, and then, because I'm seeing also this sort of psychological switch that's thrown too, that I'm seeing a lot of women in particular in their 60s, but also men in their 60s too, where I think you gain headspace. I think
I
you
would agree.
gain, yeah, and I'm seeing that more and more, which I'm loving seeing. And I think because that switch flicks, you can actually free up some time in there. Get rid of the past. Forget it. It's done. Something changes. Something shifts that I've seen people in their 60s that I really, really admire.
Yeah, and the other thing I've noticed, and there's a common thread in this, and it's only now you've said that I've kind of highlighted it. I've noticed friends who have other friendships that they've had for maybe 40 years in their 60s start to challenge and question why those friendships are one-sided, and why they're the only one that's putting in effort, or they're the only one that's making those calls, or the only one who's creating those activities or events for them to attend. And again, it's that rational, actually, what value do I obtain from this relationship? And they're actually making conscious decisions in some cases to step away from that because the effort's not reciprocated. And I found that really interesting to watch.
Yeah, I think you just got it. Perhaps in your 60s you've got it suss that you realise what's actually important in life, and those people. Who are those people? Does it become less important to have dozens and dozens of friends? I mean, I've always been one to have a very close, small circle of friends. I've never been one. I know a lot of people, but actually in my inner circle, it's very small. And that's just the way I roll. I mean, some people like to have not such an intimate friendship circle, but they have a very wide circle of people that they know and that they socialize with, but
Have
perhaps
a
they don't.
visitor.
Oh, hello.
Go away.
Wanting the
Go away.
limelight.
Go. He always does this and go away.
You're stealing her
Get out.
thunder.
Honestly, he does it every time, even on business teams. He'll
My
join
word.
mid-call. You get 30 minutes and then he joins in. He's gone. He's lying down.
Never worked with
On the
children.
bed that I promised he was never allowed on.
Well, clearly you've got headspace for that now as well.
It's amazing the things. Here's another one. This is a different one, incidentally. Right, go away, all of you. This goes with the right, we're not doing this, beat it. Go away.
I'm leaving this bit in, by the way, because it's hugely entertaining.
Yeah, thanks, Dee. Welcome to my world. Don't be fooled.
Yeah, so animals for many of us are really, really important.
Oh, dear heavens, honestly.
So, okay, I think we've put the world to rights in some areas, and we'll continue to do so through the work that we do with women and men's health. But I think that the message has to be, don't fear getting older, just fear getting sicker. And sometimes those things, are within our control. Sometimes they're not. But for all the things that are within our grasp to change, then, don't procrastinate, make the changes.
Yeah, I think we're at the age and stage where, things like, I've got a huge home gym that I've underutilized for years. I didn't necessarily think so much about diet and what I consumed. And I think there's so many things now that you pay more attention to, and you are definitely much more engaged with, or much more determined to master, I think is probably a better way of summing it up than previously. And I think as well, people thinking about the being bold, and you don't have to be in full-time employment working in a corporate environment and being miserable. Thinking about those changes you can positively make in your own life to maximize your enjoyment. I'm self-employed now, and I've got that freedom and flexibility to do what I'm passionate about and do what I'm enthusiastic about, and where I know I've got expertise and I can add value. And I think all of those things are choices, and it's just being bold about making the right choices for you.
Well, I hope this conversation uplifts as it's meant to, and inspires where it's needed, and that perhaps it's touched a nerve for a few. Perhaps it will just give women a little bit of confidence to act upon their thoughts, because actually we're all guilty of thinking things and not doing things. And actually time goes on, and we know the older we get, the faster time speeds up. And so we have no time to procrastinate. We just need to live the lives that fulfill us, and that that we really want to treasure in those final moments. That's the only certainty in life, isn't it? That we're all going to have these final thoughts and final moments, and we want to be able to look back on a full life, and at least some time that we have spent living it for ourselves and not always for other people.
I think it's that be happy and make choices that are the right choices for you, not always putting everyone else first, without a shadow of a doubt.
Yeah. Now, the other thing, my last thing, is don't expect other people to make you happy. I think when we realize that it's not other people, it's not their responsibility to make us happy. That's no one else's responsibility except our own. And sometimes that can take decades to learn that. But it's so true.
You mentioned something earlier briefly about losing friends of our own age, and having close friendships and relationships where they lose perhaps a partner, or a husband, and those dynamics and that shift in those dynamics really makes you question what does make people happy in life, and how, if you've placed all your happiness in one other person or into situations, you're then left with these gaps where you have to reinvent yourself or re-find you. And I think those moments are harsh to watch. There's some real lessons and some real golden nuggets in there about being true to you and making yourself happy.
Definitely, and understanding what that word actually means.
Yeah.
Because happiness means different things to different people. And also, being happy 24/7 doesn't exist. We're humans. We're not going to be happy all the time.
No. We thrive on emotion, and happiness is one element of that. It's not a state of mind that you can live in forever. It's not. You set yourself up for an unrealistic expectation.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I wish you some happiness and back on your feet soon.
Thank you very much indeed.
As I know you
Pleasure to catch up.
Yeah, and sensible shoes, big knickers.
Oh, really, I think
happy
I'm safer
smiles.
I honestly believe I'm safer in heels, Dee.
And I'll speak to you again soon. It's a pleasure talking to you, Kathryn. Thank you.
And you. Take care. See you soon. Bye for now. Thank you.